For more than 400 years, a lie has hung silently on the walls of classrooms, in newsrooms, and even in the offices where world leaders make decisions. A lie so simple that most of us never thought to question it: a map. On that map, Africa appears small, far away, almost insignificant. But the truth is, staggering. Africa is vast, central, and powerful. Think about this: on the Mercator projection that nearly every one of us grew up with, Greenland looks almost as big as Africa. Yet in reality, Africa is 14 times larger. Europe, which seems to stretch proudly across the map, could fit inside Africa along with China, India, and the United States, with room still left over. For centuries, this distortion did more than just mislead. It planted an idea deep in the minds of children and adults alike that Europe and North America were big and Africa was small. But maps are not innocent drawings. They shape how we think about power, wealth, and destiny. When generation after generation of African children see their homeland reduced to a fraction of its true size, it sends a dangerous message. Your land is less important, your people are less capable, your future is less valuable. That is not just geography, it is propaganda. And now, at last, Africa is fighting back. The African Union is demanding that the world replace this colonial distortion with the Equal Earth Map, a projection that shows continents as they truly are. For the first time, Africa stretches wide across the center of the world, reclaiming its rightful position as the beating heart of our planet. So I must ask you, if the world has been looking at Africa through a lie for 400 years, what else have we been taught to believe that is not true? And if perception shapes policy, how much has this single image cost Africa and the world in freedom, justice, and opportunity? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a world map the same way again. And if you believe that truth matters more than propaganda, please share this message and subscribe, because together we can make sure Africa is finally seen for what it truly is. At the center of this story lies something most of us take for granted: the map of our world. For centuries, the Mercator projection has been the standard image, hanging in classrooms, printed in textbooks, and flashed on television screens. Designed in the 16th century by Gerardus Mercator, its original purpose was practical. It helped sailors navigate oceans in straight lines, making trade routes easier to follow across vast seas. For navigation, it was revolutionary, but for truth, it was disastrous. Here is why. In order to keep straight lines accurate, the Mercator map stretched the land masses near the poles. That made places like Europe, North America, and Greenland look much larger than they really are. And to balance the scale, it compressed the regions near the equator, shrinking Africa, South America, and much of Asia into smaller, distorted images. The result was not just a navigational aid, it was a silent lie that reinforced an unequal worldview. Take a closer look. On the Mercator projection, Greenland appears almost equal in size to Africa. In reality, Greenland covers just over 2 million square kilometers, while Africa covers more than 30 million. That means Africa is 14 times larger. Europe, which looks roughly equal in size to Africa, could in truth fit multiple times inside the African continent, along with China, India, and the entire United States. Yet, to the naked eye on a Mercator map, Europe stretches proudly across the globe, while Africa appears compact and modest. This distortion had consequences far beyond geography. Maps shape perception, and perception shapes policy. In classrooms across the world, children learned from their first days of study that Europe and North America were the dominant centers of the planet, while Africa was marginal and small. Generations of Africans grew up seeing their home drawn as a lesser piece of the world puzzle, and generations outside Africa learned to underestimate its importance. The colonial powers understood this power of imagery well. At the height of empire, when European nations carved Africa into colonies with rulers and pens, the Mercator map quietly reinforced the illusion of superiority. It told both the colonizers and the colonized that Europe was big and Africa was small. And when a people come to see themselves as small, the colonizer's job is half done. The tragedy is that this image endured long after its usefulness for sailors faded. Even in the 20th and 21st centuries, when new projections could better reflect the true proportions of our planet, the Mercator projection continued to dominate classrooms and news broadcasts. It was not just a mistake, it became part of the global mindset. This is why the African Union's recent call matters so much. They are not just asking schools to switch from one map to another. They are demanding the world to confront a 400-year deception, a distortion that has shaped attitudes, policies, and even global economics. By calling for the adoption of the Equal Earth map, the AU is insisting that Africa finally be shown as it really is immense, resource-rich, and positioned at the crossroads of the world. And the facts back this up. Africa is the second largest continent on Earth, covering more than 30 million square kilometers, 3 times the size of the United States, 3 times the size of China, 3 times the size of Europe. It is home to 1.3 billion people, the youngest population on the planet, and holds the richest collection of natural resources anywhere in the world. Yet the old map told another story, one of weakness, of smallness, of insignificance. This is the event unfolding before us now. The African Union is rewriting not just geography, but perception itself, and in doing so, it is challenging centuries of propaganda that quietly shrank Africa's place in the human imagination. The turning point came in 2018 when a group of cartographers unveiled what they called the Equal Earth Projection. Unlike Mercator, this map did not serve colonial traders or naval powers, it served truth. For the first time, every continent was drawn in proportion to its actual landmass. And when the new map was revealed, Africa's shape dominated the globe. Stretching more than 30 million square kilometers, centered between the Americas, Europe, and Asia, it looked less like a periphery and more like the heart of the planet. This moment marked a symbolic revolution. For centuries, the lie of smallness had been reinforced by every map in every classroom. But here on the Equal Earth Projection, Africa's vastness could no longer be denied. The psychological impact was immediate. Teachers, journalists, and political leaders began to see not a marginal continent, but a central one. And now, in 2025, the African Union has officially demanded that the Equal Earth Projection replace Mercator in schools, offices, and media across the world. This is the climax of the story. Africa, once drawn small and overlooked, is now demanding to be seen as it truly is. Not through speeches or protests, but through the simple, powerful act of redrawing the world. But as with every revolution, reactions have been mixed. Many Africans welcomed the AU's call as long overdue. To them, correcting the map is more than a geographic adjustment. It is an act of dignity, a reclamation of history, and a statement to future generations that Africa is vast, rich, and unshrinkable. One commentator put it clearly, correcting the map is restoring Africa's rightful place at the center of our world. Others, however, were skeptical. They argued that while maps matter, the continent faces more urgent crises: poverty, corruption, youth unemployment, climate disasters, and security threats from terrorism. We do not eat maps, one critic wrote. If the African Union wants to show its strength, let it first provide us with one passport, one currency, one borderless continent. To them, the map debate was symbolic, but symbols without action risk becoming distractions. Still others went further, accusing the AU of hypocrisy. They pointed out that more than half of the Union's budget comes from the United States and the European Union. How can an institution funded by outsiders lecture us about dignity? One African asked bitterly. In their eyes, changing the map was cosmetic, unless it was matched by structural change, economic independence, political stability, and genuine sovereignty. And yet even critics admitted one thing: images matter. For centuries, maps have been used as tools of propaganda, shaping how nations see themselves and how the world ranks their importance. Just as colonial powers once used distorted maps to divide and weaken Africa, the Equal Earth Projection has the potential to unite and inspire it. Outside Africa, reactions were equally telling. Caribbean leaders through CARICOM expressed support, calling the Equal Earth Projection a rejection of the ideology of dominance embedded in Mercator. Civil society groups like Africa No Filter and Speak Up Africa hailed it as a milestone in the fight against stereotypes. For them, this was not just a technical correction, it was a global statement that the age of distortion must end. Meanwhile, in Europe and the United States, the debate was quieter, even uncomfortable. After all, if Africa is portrayed as the world's central landmass, what does that mean for the old narrative of Western dominance? For investors, policymakers, and media outlets, the Equal Earth Projection is not only a new image, it is a new lens through which Africa must be acknowledged as a decisive global player. This is the drama unfolding today. At the heart of it is a map, but beneath it lies a battle of perception, power, and future identity. Africa is saying, we will no longer be drawn small. We are vast, we are central, and our time is now. When the African Union declared that it was time to replace the Mercator projection, many dismissed it as a symbolic gesture. But symbols, when carried for centuries, become chains. Breaking them has real consequences socially, politically, and psychologically. On the social front, the implications are profound. Imagine a generation of African schoolchildren growing up with the equal Earth map, no longer seeing their home as a tiny sliver beneath Europe, but as a giant landmass that stretches across the heart of the world. That simple change can nurture confidence, pride, and ambition. A child who sees his or her homeland represented as vast and central is less likely to internalize the myths of weakness and dependency that colonial propaganda once sowed. It is not merely about geography, it is about dignity. The psychological weight of smallness has shaped Africa for too long. When people believe their land is insignificant, they begin to accept that their voices, their resources, and their destiny are insignificant too. Reversing that perception means opening the door for a new mindset, one in which Africans see themselves as equal players capable of leading rather than following. Politically, the consequences are even sharper. Maps are not neutral. They influence negotiations and international relations. For decades, when Africa was portrayed as small global institutions from the IMF to the UN, treated it as a marginal player despite its resources and population. Aid packages were framed as charity, not as fair exchange. Trade agreements were drafted under the assumption that Africa was a dependent partner. But if the world begins to see Africa's true scale, the legitimacy of those arrangements weakens. The continent can demand fairer terms, not as a beggar, but as a power. This ties directly to the question of resources. Africa holds staggering reserves: 60% of the world's arable land, 90% of raw material reserves, 40% of global gold reserves, 33% of diamonds, 95% of platinum, the largest bauxite reserves in the world. Add to this uranium, manganese, oil, and timber, and the picture becomes clear. The old map minimized Africa just as its resources were being siphoned away. A new map asserts reality. The continent is not a backyard, it is the storehouse of the future. But there is also a darker side. With truth comes confrontation. If Africa asserts its size and centrality, external powers will resist. History shows that dominance thrives on distortion. From Jacques Chirac's chilling admission that Europe bled Africa for 4.5 centuries, to modern studies showing that over 100 Western companies still control hundreds of billions in African resources, the pattern is clear: a minimized Africa was a profitable Africa for others. Correcting the map threatens that system. For African governance, the challenge is internal. Many citizens argue that changing the map is not enough if corruption, dictatorship, and mismanagement continue at home. They are right. A larger image of Africa must be matched by leaders of fortified character, as the video transcript itself emphasized. Without reform, the danger is that the equal Earth projection becomes just another picture, powerful in the classroom, but meaningless in the marketplace. In the end, the political and social consequences are twofold: a chance for Africa to reclaim dignity and bargaining power, and a warning that symbolism must be backed by substance. If the continent can align perception with policy, truth with governance, then redrawing the map may become more than an academic exercise. It may become the foundation of a new African century. From Washington to Brussels, the African Union's call to replace the Mercator map has sparked quiet unease. On the surface, it may appear to Western policymakers as a technical adjustment, a matter for educators and cartographers. But beneath the surface, they understand what is truly at stake: power perception and influence. For the United States, maps have long been more than geography. They have been instruments of strategy. American children, like African children, grew up seeing Europe and North America appear large and dominant. This psychological reinforcement served a geopolitical purpose. It subtly justified America's sense of exceptionalism and leadership in global affairs. If the equal Earth map is adopted worldwide, the visual message changes. Suddenly, Africa is not small and marginal, but enormous and central. That shift alone threatens to upend narratives America has relied on to frame Africa as a dependent region in need of aid rather than a partner in negotiation. Europe, too, has reason to feel exposed. Former colonial powers built their dominance not only on the physical extraction of Africa's resources, but also on the mental framework that Africa was lesser. The equal Earth projection dismantles that framework. If Africa is seen as vast, resource-rich, and strategically central, the legitimacy of Europe's historical role erodes further. What once looked like civilizing missions or development aid becomes transparent exploitation. Global reactions reveal a divide. The Caribbean community CARICOM openly supports the equal Earth projection, calling it a rejection of the ideology of dominance embedded in Mercator. Civil society groups across Latin America, Asia, and Africa echo the sentiment, framing it as part of a larger post-colonial awakening. These regions understand what it means to be drawn small, to have their realities minimized for the convenience of empire. Meanwhile, in Western media, coverage remains cautious. Journalists acknowledge the scientific accuracy of the equal Earth projection, but hesitate to confront the deeper implications. To admit that Africa has been deliberately minimized for centuries is to admit complicity in a narrative of dominance. For institutions built on that dominance, such acknowledgement is uncomfortable, even dangerous. For the rest of the world, China, Russia, India, the change in mapping plays into existing strategies. These nations are already courting Africa as the next frontier of global growth. A map that highlights Africa's true scale only strengthens their case. Partnership with Africa is not optional, it is inevitable. At its core, the world's reaction to Africa's map revolution reveals this truth: whoever controls the image of Africa controls its place in the global imagination. The United States and Europe now face a challenge. They did not anticipate how to deal with a continent that refuses to be drawn small any longer. For more than 4 centuries, the world has looked at a distorted map and accepted a distorted truth. Africa, drawn small, was treated as small. Its resources were plundered, its people were misled, and its dignity was buried beneath the myth of insignificance. But now, with the equal Earth projection, that illusion is breaking. And yet the fight is not over. A new map will not feed the hungry, it will not end corruption, and it will not stop wars. But it will plant a seed of perception that can grow into action. When every African child sees their homeland filling the center of the world, when every policymaker sees Africa's size before signing trade agreements, when every journalist reports from a map that tells the truth, then the mental chains of colonial propaganda begin to crack. But here lies the warning: symbols are powerful, but only if they are matched with substance. If leaders display the equal Earth map on their walls but continue to bow to foreign lenders, then Africa remains trapped. If schools teach children about Africa's vastness, but governments still neglect their health and education, then the map becomes just another decoration. The challenge now is to unite the symbol with the struggle, turning dignity into development, perception into power. For the United States, for Europe, for every global power watching, this is not just Africa redrawing itself. This is Africa announcing that it will no longer be underestimated. And for us viewers, citizens, elders, it is a reminder that the images we accept shape the futures we inherit. So I leave you with these questions. Do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's reform strategies are truly strong enough to turn symbols into real independence? Can we continue to trust his leadership to carry Africa through this new awakening, or should another generation step forward to take his place? If you believe that Africa must no longer be drawn small, then share this message. If you believe that truth is more important than headlines, then subscribe and stay with us. Because perception is power, and until Africa is seen as vast, central, and unshrinkable, the world's picture will always be wrong. Africa is not small. Africa is not weak. Africa is the beating heart of our planet. And the time for the world to see it clearly is now.